In today's episode, we're going to be adding to our 2005 infrastructure. And of course, since our series is around collaborating like it's 2005, we're going to need some email. So today we're going to be setting up an Exchange server. We'll be setting up some internet services as well. We'll have another web server out there, a webmail server, and we will have a web server, of course. We'll do some DNS, a few other things to kind of make everything fit together. Hopefully by the end of our episode, we'll be sending email back and forth between two different mail domains. And we'll see what else we may have time for along the way. Anyway, this is Josh, your host. Welcome to Tech Tides. Alright, so we're going to jump right in here by making our Exchange virtual machine. We're going to set its settings in VMware, pick a Windows Server 2003 ISO, and kick off the install. Now we'll speed this up really quick. We've done this before here on Tech Tides, so I'm not going to show all the detail. We'll set our username, we'll add a product key, we will add a work group, just some basic settings, time zones, things like that Windows makes you do. And then we will rush through the rest of this install because there's nothing particularly exciting to see here. So after the install is done, the next thing we're going to need is VMware tools. And so this was a bit more challenging than normal here because I couldn't get a cursor at all inside of my virtual machine. So trying to do that with the keyboard was pretty exciting. So we finally got it to where we are installing VMware tools. And then once that's done, we will go ahead and do a reboot. And then after our reboot is done here, we will then install SP1 for Windows 2003. So Service Pack 1 was released in the year 2005. Service Pack 2 wasn't released till 2007, so we definitely wouldn't have been running that. But we'll get SP1 on here, then we'll reboot, and then after that we will make sure we've got connectivity. So we're going to set a static IP address, and then we've got some connectivity tests we're going to do real quick, and then that wraps up this part of it. Okay, so our next step then is to join the domain. So we'll go in there, we'll put in our domain of pinnacledataworks.com. We will log in with a domain username and password, and then we will again be prompted to reboot. So we'll go ahead and reboot the server, and once it is back, we will go ahead and log in. And then once we're logged in, we're going to adjust our screen resolution once again, get that to a more reasonable setting, and then we should be ready to, well, one more thing we need to do here, the enhanced security configuration. We're going to get rid of that from add remove programs. That's how you do that in this version. And then we're going to mount the Exchange 2003 ISO image, and we are going to start the process of installing Exchange here. So the first thing we need to do is install some additional services. We need NNTP, SMTP, World Wide Web, so we'll go through that process now. Configure your server wizard is how you do that, so we'll start by installing IIS, and of course, once again, we've got to juggle some images here. Okay, so now we're going to juggle some images again, and we'll go ahead and throw the Windows 2003 Server ISO back in there, finish the IIS installation, and we'll go through this again, install our next component. This time I think will be the SMTP server, I believe is what I do next. While I'm thinking about it, I'm going to copy the i386 files to the hard drive. Should have done this to start with, but completely forgot about it. So now we'll do SMTP server, the same process. We'll put the Exchange ISO back in to actually continue this process. And this time we'll point it to the hard drive for those files instead of the CD. We'll let that go through and install. And then now we need to do NNTP. And for this one, we will actually go back to the add remove programs, and we've got to go into IIS configuration. We can add SMTP there. So we'll do that, or NNTP, sorry. NNTP there. So we'll go through that, let that install, and then we will go ahead and continue. Got to put the Exchange CD, or got to put the Windows 2003 Server ISO back in, because now we need the support tools, which I didn't copy. I just copied the i386 folder. So we'll go ahead and do support tools, and then once again we got to switch CDs back to the Exchange image. So we'll do that, and then we will continue our install process here. Next up is DC Diag, and at this point I had not yet noticed that I forgot to log into the domain controller. I just logged into the local machine, so we can do a couple more of these steps before fixing that. And I'll notice here in just a minute that I failed to do that. So, but looking through DC diag, that looks fine. Now it tells us to do net diag, and I checked that as well. That was fine. But now when we go to do forest prep, this doesn't look quite right. And so I'll do this again, but we'll get an error message here that reminds me that, hey, you didn't log into the domain. So once I see that, then I log out of the machine, log back in, and we can then restart this process, get back into the installation, and we will jump back to forest prep again. And now we will be able to forest prep our domain controller. So we'll speed this process up even more than the rest of this here and kind of rush through this. Basically, this just updates a bunch of Active Directory attributes since Exchange is deeply embedded in Active Directory. So now that that's done, we'll now do domain prep. And again, this will do more updating stuff. It gives us a message that one of our pre-Windows 2000 groups has users in it, which isn't really recommended. So I'm just going to go ahead and fix that real quick. I'll switch back to the domain controller and goof around with the resolution. Then we'll go into our AD users and groups. We'll find that group and go in and remove all those users, because this is not something that I'm intentionally using anyway. So we'll just clean that up to avoid any future problems. And then finally, we will do domain prep again. We will then start the setup process for Exchange. Finally. So it gives us a message. We accidentally installed the POP3 server when I was setting things up. So I've got to go in and uninstall POP3. So that's what we're doing here. That should process relatively quickly. And then we can continue on with our Exchange process. So here we go. We are creating our organization, and we are now finally installing Microsoft Exchange 2003. Okay, so finally here, finally getting to the installation, and again we'll speed this up significantly so we can just continue on with the next thing here. So Exchange will install, and then we will just complete this process. Not really anything else exciting to see there. We'll remove the Exchange ISO, and then we will open the Exchange console so we can continue from there. Okay, so in order for us to be able to get mail to work, we need to have a name server, a DNS server. So I'm going to go ahead and install a Linux box here to make that work for us. And just a Ubuntu image, I'm go ahead and actually, I'm not going to set an IP address. I went through this several times, and for whatever reason, updates were causing this install to fail. So we'll just do a basic setup. We'll set a static IP later. So we'll go ahead and just set our credentials, basic disk layout. We'll enable SSH, and then we will kick off this install. And again, we're just going to speed this up super quick to get through it. And then we will get to the actual setup part of this. So that gets installed, we run a reboot, and then we boot up. Once again, we'll speed this up so we can get in here relatively quickly. Now, this thing isn't really super happy that it's not able to get an IP address. I don't have DHCP enabled on this server network, so we have to do static IPs here. So that's okay, that'll fail out eventually. And then once that does, we can get to a login prompt where we can then log in and start configuring this box. Okay, so now that NSO1 is up, we need to set an IP address. So we'll set a static IP, and we'll bring that link up. And our ping's working, so we'll need to set a route next. We'll set the default route. And then we are going to connect via SSH, just so we don't have to deal with the annoying console anymore. And so we will then need to do updates, so we got to set a DNS server. We'll do that here. We're just going to use 8.8.8.8. And then we'll run our apt update here. So as part of this, this kind of hangs up. It's really slow, not really going very fast. So I'm going to break out of this. And then what should have happened is I should have then showed the end result of this, building out the machine and stuff like that. But that didn't happen. So let's just jump ahead. I'll kind of show you the summary and we'll go from there. So now the first thing we're going to do is look at our netplan config here. That way we can persist our IP settings. So there's that. And then we need to make sure we have the PowerDNS things installed. So server, backend, SQLite, and the precursor. Now here's our PowerDNS config that we ended up with. So can take a look at that there. I also have these posted on my blog, so you can see, probably a little bit easier to understand them from there. And then there's the recursor config as well. So we've got this set up both as the authoritative DNS server as well as a recursor. And then once everything's set up, obviously you're going to want to restart those services. That way they will be operational. And then the next thing we're going to do is just a quick curl test here just to make sure that the PowerDNS service is responding. So we'll drop that in there with the API key, and we do get a response as expected. So it looks like we do have a at least basically operational PowerDNS install. The next step is to update our Active Directory domain controller DNS server to use PowerDNS, because that's effectively our ISP in this environment. So we want to make sure we're sending our requests there. So we'll go here into the forward lookup zone. We'll go into the DNS server itself, I guess, on 81. And right now we've got a public forwarder, so we'll clear that out. And then we will set up the IP for a PowerDNS server there. That way we can send requests to it. And then we're going to need to do some tests here. So we're going to just run some NS lookup requests, make sure we're getting good DNS resolution here. So the first thing we're going to do, again, we're still on our 81 server Active Directory server here. We're going to make sure we get a MX response for pinnacledataworks.com, which we do. So that's a good sign. Now, the next thing we're going to do is switch over to our Exchange server, and we're going to do some tests there. We're going to make sure that is working. So we'll hit our command prompt, and again, we're going to do an NS lookup, make sure we can get our MX record resolved correctly, which we do. So then we should be ready to go ahead and continue the Exchange configuration here. So we'll start our internet mail wizard here. We've got our server. Yep, we're going to receive. Yes, that's our domain. Yes, yes, yes. All that looks good. Yep. Pretty much defaults all the way across. And we are now done with that step. That was super easy. And then what we need to do next is we're going to go ahead and set up some fictional users here. So let's see, what did we set up this user for in CallManager? Let's take a look at that line. We called him Bob. So let's go ahead and give him a full name. We'll call him Bob Johnson, and we'll save that. And then we are going to go, after that is done, we're going to create a user for Bob Johnson. So we'll go back to our domain controller. Actually, we'll do it just right from our Exchange server. We can get into Active Directory users and computers. We'll create Bob Johnson here. We will give him a super complicated password, and we will set up an Exchange mailbox for him, so that's good. And then we should be ready to go ahead and continue with the next step of this process, which I should have included here, but apparently forgot again. This is building the retro mail virtual machine. So we'll just kind of summarize that. So here's the VM that's already been built. Again, I have showed this before on other VMs. So 1 CPU, 2 gigs of memory, 120 gigs of hard disk space, nothing crazy here. So we'll go ahead and boot that up, and we'll just run through our standard Ubuntu install here again. So just jump through that. Now, I didn't set up an IP address for the install. Whatever reason on this day, installs were failing for me whenever I gave it connectivity. So I think it had to do with that, what the update that was trying to install just timing out. So I don't know. I just went ahead and didn't set an IP address. That way that update wouldn't run during install. Figured I would deal with that post install. So we'll just run through this super quick here. And then once this is done, we can give it our reboot. And then we will continue by the next step here will obviously be to set an IP address. That way we can get connectivity into the box and stuff like that. Now the purpose of this VM, this RetroMail VM, is to give us a webmail interface. That way we have another domain that we can use for email. Obviously email is not super helpful when it's just one domain. You kind of need another one. So we'll build out our NetPlan config here. That way we can get connectivity. And you'll see I immediately make a mistake here, and we'll fix that in just a minute. But we'll go ahead and set our IP address here. We'll give our network settings. So we'll give this one a .10. We'll set a default route pointing out to .1. And then we will give it a DNS server of our PowerDNS server we just created. So that's 100.100.100.100. Nice and easy to remember there. And then that should be it. So we'll save that. And then you'll notice here when I go to apply this, oh, you have to set the permissions first, otherwise it complains a lot. So we'll set the permissions, we'll go to apply, and then it says, whoops, you typed something wrong. So we'll fix that, and then I will go back in and try to apply that again. So easy fixer, just spelled the network wrong, and that applied correctly. So now we should have IP connectivity, and that looks good. Pinging out, excellent. So now we can continue on with the next step of the process here. We will SSH into that box. Apparently get the password wrong the first time every time. And then next step here is to continue on with some updates and stuff. And then we'll set the host name to mail.retromail.com. We will install Dovecot and Postfix, the other components we need there to get mail working. And we'll set this up as an internet site, obviously. We're just going to call it retromail.com. And then run through the install here to finish that up. Okay, so that will run. And then after that, we need some clients. So that'll be kind of our next step in the process here. All right, so first we're going to create a home user kind of workstation here. And this will just be running. I was originally just going to run Ubuntu on this, Ubuntu desktop, but ultimately I decided to switch to Ubuntu. I'm not sure if that's how that's pronounced. And then we're going to create a Windows XP workstation for our Pinnacle DataWorks user. So we'll set that up here. Thankfully, those requirements are pretty thin on that machine. So the other thing I realized is that I did not create my client network here. So we've got to take a quick detour to go and create that. So in VMware, we'll just click networking. We'll give it a name here. I'll just give it a client name. And then now that shows up in my list of networks. So now we can go back, edit our VM, point that to the client network, and then we can go ahead and boot that guy up. So Windows XP setup here will go pretty quickly. However, we immediately realize that the disk type is wrong. So we've got to go back in and get that switch to an IDE drive. Now, I momentarily forgot here that this version of the VM didn't support IDE disks, so I actually had to upgrade the VM hardware. So that is now done. Sorry, that's not done. That is now done. And then I forget 3 or 4 times that I've got to go and answer this question about settings being modified. And at some point I realize there it is, that I've got to do that. And then I can go in and add a new IDE hard disk at that point. So now when we start Windows setup here, this should actually complete. Yes, it does. Okay, quick format. And we will get through this pretty quickly. This is sped up a bit here, but this installs relatively quick anyway. So we get Windows XP thrown onto this machine quickly here. We will reboot, continue install. Now we'll switch over to our Ubuntu machine here and eventually configure this here. Yeah, there we go. So yep, I didn't connect this to the internet yet. We'll go ahead and set up our partitions, give it a username, yada, yada, yada. That's great. Okay, wonderful. Okay, now that is installing. We can switch back to our XP VM to continue with this. We'll give it a name, Pinnacle DataWorks, enter in a product key there, and fix that. Yeah, user, name, time zone, standard Windows stuff here. If you've set up a Windows PC before, you've seen this. We'll just fast forward through the rest of the install here. That way we can get on to the next step. Okay, so standard Windows stuff. Check internet connectivity, set up your LAN, set up a DNS, yes, set up a user. We'll set up our user Bob here. All right, and then the next thing we will do is attempt to install VMware tools, which you'll see ultimately fails here. So we'll get that ISO mounted, and we will start the install. And again, we'll kind of fast forward through this as quickly as possible. We end up getting a installer error message here. So I don't know exactly what's going on here yet. So we'll just, my plan is just to skip this, install the service pack. For whatever reason, I have the wrong one. We'll try it again. So that starts installing, and then we'll switch over to the Ubuntu setup part of it, and we'll go ahead and focus on that for a minute here. So the XP SP2 install is continuing. So, and the reason I picked XP SP2 is because that kind of fits in our 2005 timeline. XP Service Pack 3 was after that. So SP2 is what I picked here. Now, in our Ubuntu machine, we need to set our IP address. And this is kind of on my pseudo internet segment, so we've got to go static here. So we'll give it 100.100.100.25. Dot one is the gateway. We'll go ahead and point it at our PowerDNS. .100 machine is the DNS server. And then that should get us some basic connectivity going here. Now our SP2 is finished installing here, so we can take another crack at installing VMware tools. So we'll go ahead and unmount the SP2 ISO, and then we will mount the VMware tools ISO again. We'll start that install, run through that, get the installer error again because we didn't do anything different. This time we're just going to run the setup file directly, and that finally works. So that allows us to install VMware tools. So we'll get through that, we'll restart, and then after a restart here, we'll log back in, fix our display settings, change some desktop stuff, and then the next thing we want to do is join this to the domain. So we go in here, join it to pinnacledataworks.com, log in as an admin, reboot one more time, and then we will log in once again as Bob to the domain this time though, not just the local machine. And apparently I forgot to record another segment here, as is the recurring case in this episode, but at this point we would need to install Roundcube to round out our webmail server, our retro mail server. So let's pretend like I did that, and then we'll continue on with the setup of Roundcube. All right, so after we install Roundcube, we have to enable it within Apache. And then obviously that's still not going to work because we have to actually create a site for it. So we'll do that. We'll paste in a config here, and then we will restart Apache, which should hopefully fix it. There we go. Also off camera, I created a user called Alice. So we'll log in with Alice, and we are now in our inbox. So now what we're going to do is we're going to install Office 2003, because that would have been a likely version for a user to have been using in the year 2005. So we will set that up. We'll log in as administrator, and we will put in our product key, and then we will continue our install here. We'll go ahead and do a full install of all the apps. All we really care about is Outlook in this scenario, but it's fine. We'll just install everything. So we fix our desktop icons again. We'll fire up Outlook, and then we will set up our user, and our user is mailed up. Yeah, Bob is our user. Pinnacle DataWorks, mail at pinnacledataworks.com is our Exchange server. And so we are now in our inbox here in Outlook. So that seems to have connected to Exchange correctly. We will fix a few other just random things here, get rid of a bunch of junk, and we're going to send a message. And we send a message and try sending a message to Bob. And that doesn't work. Nothing works. Everything's broken. So let's see what we can figure out here. Okay, so rather than subject you to the hours it took me to troubleshoot this, I'm just going to kind of summarize what happened here. So the first thing we're going to look at is our Roundcube config. That's fairly straightforward, nothing crazy there. And then we're going to show the Apache config here. This is something I set up earlier, so that's just to show how that's working. And then we're going to move on to the postfix stuff. So this is the main.cf config, kind of showing what ended up getting changed there. And then the master config file. So a couple things were changed there. And then we'll look at the dovecot configs. So this is a longer one. A couple of changes to things here to get this to work. And so let's see, mainly just setting the users correctly, the mode correctly. I don't think there was anything else there. Then we'll look at the auth config. I think I had to change something there. Plain text auth, maybe? I don't remember. Then the mail config. And then finally, last one here was the actual dovecot config itself. So there's that. All right, so now we're ready for another test here. So we'll log back into Roundcube, and we will send a message from Alice to Bob. And there we go. Now we have fixed that. We'll try and send one in the other direction now, and we will find out that that is still not working. So now we've kind of worked out a lot of the things on the Roundcube side of things, postfix, dovecot, all that. Now we need to jump into Exchange and see why mail is not actually flowing here. So did do some basic networking checking, fixed a couple things there. Then I realized that there was never actually, I never set up a mail connector. So I went ahead and set up a mail connector, just sent that directly to um, the postfix server. So, and just set some basic settings here. And then after that, we are going to restart the service because that's part of the deal here. So after restarting the SMTP service, I did want to just do a quick check to make sure I could receive mail in general. So from the console, we're checking the mail dir here just to make sure that's set up right. And we got to sudo that. Okay. So we were able to send something there, and that does show up correctly. So we know at like a basic level this is functioning. So let's go ahead and now that we've got our connector in place, let's do this test one more time. We'll compose our message to Alice, and we'll give it a test subject and a body here, and then we will push the send button, and that says that it's sent, and that says that it's received. So at this point, we have functioning mail in both directions. We're going to go ahead and do a reply here just to make sure that part is still working. And do our send receive here in Outlook. And there it is. So now we've confirmed that we have bidirectional email working across our two different mail services here. So that's good news. Okay, well, that was quite a process, wasn't it? But the good news is we finally have operational email, so that means we can kind of continue on with the process here into the next thing, which I'm thinking is going to be Unity at this point, but we'll see how that goes. So I did want to show one other thing here that I've been working on. A lot of the development I've been doing has been on my Mac, and unfortunately, there's not a good soft phone client on Mac that I've been able to find. I've not been able to find any actually for Cisco systems that support the skinny call control protocol. So I decided, yeah, why don't I just write my own? I know a bit of Python and kind of started down this path. Ended up being a much bigger task than I expected it to be. But I've got an open source library out there at this point called PySkinny. It's on GitHub. Feel free to check it out. But basically, you've got a semi-functional soft phone here now that you can use just from the console window. There's also kind of a command line type interpreter interface. There's a macro interface. So a bunch of different things that I've created just for random purposes. But yeah, you can come in here and set up a new call. There we go. That's my server room. Got a lot of back set to auto answer. So I'm gonna hang up that call, and yeah, we're just gonna exit out of that. So there you go. Basic soft phone operational now, right from a command line on any machine. This should work on Windows as well, but I've been testing it here on my Mac. So the other nice thing this allows me to do is test multiple soft phones at the same time. Even on a PC, if you're using Cisco's IP communicator, you can only run one instance at a time. So kind of makes it challenging for testing and packet captures and things like that. But yeah, this will be one of the things that I may continue to work on in the future. We'll see if there's any interest out there just to see more. Let me know. And yeah, let me know what you thought of this video. Would be happy to see your feedback. If there's anything you'd like to see more of, less of, definitely let me know. I'm still kind of learning how to do this as I go. Been doing this kind of telephony for a long time, but in terms of recording videos and trying to edit videos, definitely new there. So your feedback is certainly appreciated. But that'll do it for today. And this is your host, Josh, and thank you for watching. Until next time, see ya.